flipping on messages to see all messages. Let me get this poll going. Let's see. Thanks for joining. If you're just joining, check the description real quick. I'm going to be pulling up chat messages and stuff. Feel free to say hi, all that other good stuff. Let's go. Let's go. Good to see y'all. Doing kind of a chilled out stream today. Thanks for joining. If anyone's new here, we do a lot of politics stuff, you know, and I couldn't keep Gaza and some of those other topics out of the description, but I do want to talk about the Diddy case a little bit. It's finally over. We've been hearing about it for the last couple months, for better or worse. I know some people love the celebrity gossip stuff. Other people don't as much, you know, whatever. To each their own, to each their own. So, yeah, but so the Diddy case, as well as that big Idaho murder, you know, anytime you see like young people in what looks like a true life crime drama, there's violence involved, you know, it makes national headlines. So the Bryan Kohberger case is getting resolved. We're going to talk about that one too. And then, yeah, you know, there's some new stuff on the horizon for, you know, I know some of my audience, a lot of my audience are big MAGA fans. You guys know I'm a little more in the center, but we are, you know, we're starting to see some movement in Gaza and Israel, perhaps towards a ceasefire. So that's always good news, right? That's always good news. So I'd love to hear from you. Anyone your first time here, welcome. Kind of like what we normally do, I want to be able to pull up some people's chat messages on the screen, have conversations. You know, we can all debate with you guys a little bit over chat, and you guys can debate with each other, whatever. But yeah, we saw both Benjamin Netanyahu as well as whoever are the current leaders in Hamas saying that, yeah, we're not quite at a ceasefire right now, but we're willing to sort of meet some of the conditions. Starting to look like a little bit of a better time to have that conversation. Yeah, absolutely. So let me know if you follow the Diddy trials or anything like that, or if you are deeply opinionated, willing to have a conversation about Gaza, Palestine, or about Diddy and freak-offs. Let me know. Let me know what you think. But yeah, you know, with the Diddy case so far, so that they haven't done sentencing yet, but P. Diddy is guilty of 2 crimes according to the Mann Act. 2 crimes according to the Mann Act. So the Mann Act is basically a very old bill that regulated not only prostitution and stuff that we would clearly see as like illicit activity, but the Mann Act also was regarding like just general immorality. There's a lot of really funny old laws on the books. I don't know if you guys have ever been to, like, there's websites that track old state laws, municipal laws, stuff like that. And so, yeah. The government was originally charging Diddy with 3 different crimes that could have resulted in life in prison. Um, and that's often the case when there's sexual exploitation, when there's crimes involving minors, especially when there's like abuse or coercion. When you have crimes that sort of are on that line of kidnapping, those are all like really serious crimes. I know that like a lot of the news outlets like TMZ and all those folks, they talked about that stuff a bunch, but yeah, crazy stuff. And ultimately, P Diddy was charged with 3 different crimes, right? Or he was found guilty on 2 different counts of transportation related to prostitution, which are laws related to the Mann Act. Yeah, super interesting stuff. Kind of like legally, like if you're on P Diddy's side of the fence, and you were wondering like what the government is charging you with, why, what evidence they're going to need to bring, you're in a really bad hole, right? This is probably what P Diddy's like super high priced lawyer told him right away, was like, I don't know if his lawyer probably told him, P Diddy, Sean, I don't know if you actually really goofed up. I don't know if you really goofed up, but if you look left, if you look right, you can look up, you can look down, and there's something illegal that you probably did. If they're now investigating things that happened during your like your parties, your social affairs, when you blurred the line between society and business. Sean, you really goofed there. You really fucked up. Oops, pardon my French. That slipped out. Sean Combs really fucked up, yeah. So his lawyers are probably telling him that, like, look, if they can prove that, you had drugs on your person and it was specifically for these acts and stuff like that, if they can prove that cash exchanged hands, if they can prove that you were the one coordinating people across state lines, if they can prove that there were any sort of unwilling acts in the process, these are all things that you are going to get charged for. These are all things that the federal prosecutors in the case, the government's going to come through and say that each one of these things are evidence of a unique crime. These are all different things that you could have messed up. What's up, Jessica? Yeah, especially on and they dropped all of the major charges. They dropped all the major charges as well. It's mind blowing to me. So one of the funny things about the P Diddy case is like, from my perspective, it's like, well, look, if Sean Combs was this bad of a guy, we shouldn't have had to be that confused about like like this guy should have gotten sort of either blacklisted or pushed out of these professional circles, right? I don't care if you're a music mogul, if you are a rap artist. I don't care that you're a musician. I don't care if you're a producer. I don't care if you own a rap label or a studio. I don't care how you describe it, because you're going out and doing the same thing, right? You're ultimately lining up talented artists to both engage with people in person as well as to record their voice and put that out for people, right? That was Sean Combs's job. That is what Sean Combs did for years. And if you're going to go out and also be an entrepreneur, you're going to be an investor, you're going to do all of these things, like no one can tell you how to do that. Like you can have a soiree, you can network deeply and all this other stuff. But what you can't do, what you probably shouldn't be doing, is having these freak off sex parties. Half of them being dropped. Yeah. I mean, even more than half, right, Jessica? That's like more than half in every single sentence that carried life imprisonment got dropped for P. Diddy. Every single one. But that's the other part, right? Like now that the government has these guilty charges, they have to move to sentencing guidelines. I know that's not that exciting. But you always get like the other half of the story that you missed the whole thing of. I know I sound like a grandpa here a little bit, but like once the government proves their case and you have a guilty verdict, like whoever is doing the sentencing, whether it's the judge or the jury, they have to look at the like the context of the case. They have to look at who committed the crimes, who the crimes were against, who the victims are, the damage to the community, as well as what precedent already exists for sentencing people for crimes like this. And so Diddy's like Sean's lawyers, Diddy's lawyers will probably argue that, like, look, you know, he doesn't have a criminal record. If he did something definitely illegal and wrong, but, you know, for someone who doesn't have a criminal record, the court maybe didn't necessarily prove that he was trying to break a law. You know, the prosecutors didn't bring the case down to that level. And that's what was in the media. That was the public trial this entire time, was that, yeah, there's an ironclad case here. There's an absolutely ironclad case that, you know, Sean Combs is going to be found guilty on a very, like, it's going to be an expedient trial. You know, there's witnesses that are in his inner circle. And whatever her name is, Cassie something or another, right? It's not like you have these like dead witnesses or people that are, you know, the victims aren't some faraway abstract person. These are human beings in real life, right? Like you have employees, you know, there's female, male sex workers, whoever actually ended up in the case file, you know, the story they wanted people to know is that you have this really strong case against P. Diddy Combs. And you don't now, right? You don't. You have two charges, both of those which are possible to carry a 10-year sentence, up to a 10-year sentence. And so who knows, you know, it's very rare to see people getting the max sentence if you don't have a criminal record. You know, if you don't have a criminal record, if his defense team can provide proof or evidence that he feels bad about it, that he's going to seek the required treatment or therapy and comply by whatever it is that the court does end up ordering. Those are all things that the court considers to like take time off of like actually sitting in jail. So half of them being dropped, you know, half the charges being dropped, and yeah, and that story's almost done, dude. Yeah, there is no therapy, right? It's a good point. I would think therapy would be, you know, Diddy stepping in and out of the studio and in the first place having not committed any like atrocious crimes. I don't know if I'm the only one that sort of thinks that. Yeah. I would think that, you know, I would think that P. Diddy, you know, this is like one of the conversations that, like, you know, TMZ didn't have, Fox News didn't have this conversation. You know, when you look at like the top producers on, like, creators on TikTok and Rumble, they didn't have this conversation. But like, you know, you always hear about these crazy, like, I don't want to call them crazy, but you always hear about these artists that tell people like, look, that tell people like, look, you know, there's so much more that is supposed to go into the creative process, right? You know, I could just picture Sean Combs saying that, like, to get to the finished product or whatever it is, you need to get to a really great whatever it is. You know, you need to have the right people in the room, the right headspace, the right brain space. People need to understand the incentive. People need to be getting ready to produce and create these artistic things. An artistic vision, right? If you're a producer or something, like, that's what you do. You produce something the audience is supposed to love. And that's all it is, right? That's all that has to end up being. Sexual predators of any variety have the highest amount of reoffending. Yeah, let me know. I'm gonna pin that comment up. I don't know if anyone has any other thoughts. I don't know if anyone has other thoughts on this idea that, like, you know, the court, like, I personally tend to have confidence that the courts provide like the right amount of punishment, like, more or less. I can pull the statistics if, yeah, go ahead. Sure. Go do it. Go do it. Yeah. Yeah, I bet there's lots of stats. I bet there's lots of stats and opinions and stuff like this. But like, Kanye West, like what was like Kanye West's main CD versus Diddy? Like his like, my dark, beautiful, twisted fantasy, whatever it was. Like that wasn't having a freak off. Like the entire non-criminal enterprise of putting together that record was like, I'm gonna call Elton John and John Legend. Right? That's what that was. I'm gonna see what Mary J. Blige is up to. That's just how big that guy is, man. Kanye West can do that. Yeah, and so for the Diddy case now, you just have the sentencing left. Typically over like, I think in most cases what the courts will be looking at is what evidence did actually finally come through, what was said during trial, and basically case law and precedent, like what can and what has to happen next and all this other stuff. That's going to be it. So we'll see. I would be surprised if he gets more than a year in prison. I'd be surprised, perhaps if he even gets no jail time. The courts, he's obviously guilty, but the courts might also take a look and see that, like, I don't know where you actually look at this factor figure that, well, didn't the courts mess up, right? If he was, okay, so, what we've been talking about is how Hollywood's this fucked up place, LA's this messed up place. Diddy built a really messed up network. Diddy was doing all this stuff that had nothing to do with producing music. Diddy had all this thing that had nothing to do with the entertainment industry. Diddy had all this stuff to do with exploiting people. And at the end of the day, he drove or told people to drive people to go do these things. So he might as well have been the one that was, stuffing whatever it is, white powder down people's nostrils and stuff. He might as well have been that person. He might as well have been. He was driving. But the big but is that he did all of this stuff in public. He was doing all of this stuff in public. Even if people didn't publicly know the details, he was still doing all of this stuff in public. And so I could picture someone who is a justice reform advocate then saying, well, look, you at least have to account for the fact that the state did bring 3 charges carrying life sentences against P. Diddy. P. Diddy was facing not 1, not 2, but 3 life sentences for these crimes. And at the end of the day, it sounds more like he was adjacent to a serious criminal enterprise or serious criminal endeavor, but it was not this homicidal kidnapping endeavor that people said it was in the first place. Yes, in society, on TMZ, on Fox News, you can have someone like Piers Morgan eventually interview P. Diddy, right? He gets the exclusive. And what P. Diddy might finally say in this interview was that, look, I was not part of this adjacent massive criminal enterprise. And Piers Morgan can just say, well, yes, you were. Yes, you were. As a society, we're going to decide that P. Diddy was deeply guilty of all of these crimes. But if you are in a court of law, if you're in a court of law now, and you're saying, well, it almost sounds like the government has to account for the actual evidence at trial, which proved P. Diddy was part of transporting people illegally. And the nature of that, as egregious as it is also does not sound like it is up to the same standard that 3 different charges carrying life sentences would normally bring P. Diddy. And so that is the court's problem, right? That is the court's problem. It's P. Diddy's problem for sure. But if you're looking at this guy now facing 2 charges for 10 years, and you are trying to be very heady about this, very heady, wrap your brain around how our court system, how federal prosecutors remain consistent, if they did their diligence in this trial, right? wouldn't it be a little weird to see someone throwing the book at someone and then them maxing out their sentences in the first place? If it was anyone other than P. Diddy, if it was anything other than, we know that a 15-year-old, probably abused, neglected sex worker was involved with this stuff. If we knew that this wasn't some drug-fueled, weird, like cultish Hollywood money-making, networking sort of very profit and me first ego-driven scheme that P. Diddy engaged in, wouldn't we normally think in the circumstances of the case that, look, you guys seem like you fucked up a little bit. You guys look and feel like you were trying to throw the book at Sean Combs, and at the end of the day, you only got 2 off on him. Yeah, good to see you again, Berserker Donkey. Let's see, we've got statistics. We've got statistics since I'm done soapboxing. Studies show that some sex offenders remain at risk to reoffend long after release. One study found that 34% of individuals committed at least one reoffense in 25 years following release. Well, Jessica, you cannot even, in the court size, I don't disagree with statistics. I don't disagree with the statistics you're providing. Alicia, good to see you. What's up, China? Good to see you. Hello, 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 hello. I see a pink hand. I see a normal hand. How y'all doing? Hope y'all are good. Replace pinned messages. Oops. Oops. Yeah. And so this is partially why when we look at the sentencing guidelines, like the minimums for any of the crimes that P. Diddy might have gotten convicted of, maybe wouldn't sound so severe for what it actually was, right? You think of powerful grown adults using drugs, violence, extortion, blackmail to have these freak off party events, and whatever else, like whatever was in that situation in the first place. It sounds sort of like it would be a horrible idea in any context. If any rational thinking person tried to contextualize how you would explain this to anyone in any professional or personal situation, it sounds absolutely horrific. But now that P. Diddy's been accused of trafficking related to prostitution, meaning that you hire sex workers to come to this party, or your publicist does, or anyone does, and you paid for the car, or whatever the actual details are, the government doesn't have a right then to look at those statistics that say, well, this guy's a total pervert and a pedophile. This guy, the government doesn't have to understand him as a pervert and a pedophile now. He's the guy that paid the check, right? He can get 10 years in prison for something adjacent to some criminal enterprise that they didn't prove anywhere else in court. The entire sort of like mafioso scheme that they were picturing P. Diddy as, the guy at the top of, the top of Moron Mountain in terms of running, you're going to honestly run young girls. I don't care their age right now, but his lawyer would say you're going to run young girls and male prostitutes. You're going to pay for bartenders, and you're going to have drugs there. You're running possibly underage girls and male prostitutes. You are talking to people that probably ran away from home. Maybe they were abused earlier in their life. Like, these are not people that you met at an adult entertainment expo that have an LLC to do sex work, to do adult entertainment. These are not professionals, which you shouldn't have even been working with in the first place. So you are going to keep people off the books and feed and funnel them drugs to go do this stuff in this freak off. And so now we're going to charge you under the Mann Act with trafficking related to prostitution. 10 years, 10 years, 10 years, 10 years. But where's the rest of the corroborating evidence? What else has P. Diddy done in the past that's wrong? So he was related or adjacent to this bad situation that's happening, but how bad was it? If it was really bad, why would you have dropped the 3 main charges? So in the court of law and the court of society, we're going to get two drastically different outcomes. No, I cannot speak Chinese. No Mandarin, no I don't know, not simplified. I don't speak Chinese. I'm sorry. I apologize. I don't, yeah, I don't speak any Chinese right now. Nope. No need. So I apologize. I wish I spoke Chinese. We do geopolitics sometimes on this channel. So a lot of my good friends, my close friends, my personal friends in Discord, we love talking about Chinese politics. We love talking about US politics, all that kind of stuff. But I don't speak Chinese. So, yeah. And so, we're having a grandpa stream on Sean Combs, and society really dropped the ball on this one. And so now, instead of explaining to people why you never have to actually have in real life this conversation, right? The IRL conversation of, like what was going through your head when you decided and then decided again to do this. And, you should never have another business deal in your life. And so because our grandma moment is, I don't know, since we can't do this, like, since we couldn't have had that social conversation, now we have to think, well, like, look, don't you see how complicated it is that, now what you pushed out is that P. Diddy's guilty. Most people won't think about it that much, but there is so much complexity in there. You cannot be a person who goes out and wills goodwill and good work ethic and good morals and ethics, not just in the entertainment industry or in your own professional blue collar, white collar world. You cannot will that stuff out while at the same time not wishing that the justice system was at least that good. And we're not going to be able to see that. There's a 0% probability that anyone will feel like justice was served in this case. And there's a 0% chance anyone can even confidently feel that way. I think people should be infuriated that you saw that people under 18 and drugs were involved in the Sean Combs case. These were the buzzwords, but where was the evidence? How can you be confident when the government doesn't get the conviction? And so now you know what? What do you know? You know that Sean Combs should have lost his network long before we ever started on this stuff. Long before we ever started on it. Absolutely mind-boggling. Very weird. Very uncomfortable. P. Diddy goofed, the government goofed, Hollywood goofed, LA goofed. And yeah, on to the next story. Yeah. Oh, I don't know. Alicia asked what the survey is asking. I don't know. I'll just redo it. It's probably freaking gibberish. Let's see. I'm gonna add a new poll. Did you guys follow the Bryan Kohberger case at all? Whatever it was. Whoops. Yuck. Yuck. I don't know how to do this. Boring. Let's go. I got a poll set up now. Yeah, Elise shows red. I spoke complete gibberish. Whoa. Yeah. So, yeah, the other one, Bryan Kohberger was the other big case. I don't know. Justice is really weird to talk to, right? Guys like Peace Goes Hour and stuff like that, they're like a big time freaking, like Peace Goes an actual lawyer. So I'm sure he could actually get into the details. I'm sure if there's any public briefs or statements that their lawyers release, he might know that stuff a little bit better. But the other side of it, yeah, with Bryan Kohberger, he's going to plead guilty to avoid the death penalty. And so this is crazy because, one of the parents in Idaho has already said that, and so he's accused of using a very violent crime, And we'll walk through this for true crime purposes. Yeah, so in Idaho, there are 4 college students living in a house. I don't know if someone heard a ruckus and called the police or if it was just eventually thus forth discovered. But they found 4 bodies, they were all mucked up with what looked like either a combat knife or a large butcher knife. And no one disposed or moved the bodies. So someone went in and looks like violently assaulted these 4 people with a murderous intent. And then eventually Bryan Kohberger gets arrested driving with his dad. And so, yeah. And Bryan Kohberger was he was a criminal justice student. I don't know if at any point during the trial, however far they've gotten in his legal processes, we actually got a picture of if he ever felt comfortable or felt it advantageous to share who he was. If part of this plea bargain is that, maybe at some point in time, he will give interviews in prison or he will speak with, forensic psychologists or whatever it is. But yeah, the reason that's typically important for restorative justice, not the punitive portions, is because, if you come across this super violent scene, you usually want to know the people that did that. You usually want to know the person and the why. You usually want to know what else they were thinking about at that time. Was there an obsession? Would they want or accept help understanding that obsession? What else, what other sort of thoughts or symptomatic things were happening at the time? If those are symptomatic, I don't know. I don't even know. Very weird. It's very strange. Very strange. And so he's going to plead guilty, Bryan Kohberger in Idaho, to the grisly murder of 4 students. He's going to plead guilty to avoid a death penalty. Yeah. Yep. So that's that. That's true crime. That's true crime in 2025 in a nutshell. Yeah, I do I do some true crime when I have insomnia, when I can't sleep. I'll put on some true crime on YouTube or whatever. If it comes up in the algorithm, I won't ever search it. But I'm like a little baby back bitch. I never liked watching horror stuff. I never liked watching stories and shit like that. Like horror movies. I didn't like crime. I didn't like any of that stuff. Mr. Ballin, he's a former Navy SEAL, isn't he? I think I've seen him on Sean Ryan's show. I don't know. I'm got too narrow of a face to. Um, yeah, yeah. No, those Navy SEAL guys are so abrasive too. They're so abrasive. Like I'll go out and like I don't fancy myself like a roughneck or a badass or anything like that. But like, when I watch like Jocko and Echo Charles's show, um, I love John Kirikow. John Kirikow is like John Kiriakou. He was the CIA whistleblower. He also tracked down ISIS leadership and Al Qaeda leadership. He worked with like senior FBI directors diplomatically to sort of coordinate between Afghani and Pakistani and Iraqi intelligence and U.S. intelligence. But yeah, I'm a big fan of John Kiriakou because he appears to have been able to see both sides of, what's in the United States' interest and how much goes into that. Like, can we do more with that? Yeah, the Navy SEAL guys, there'd probably be a ton of fun to talk to at some point. But I'm just a little too soft, I think. I'm very baby brained. Mr. Ballin, he has a podcast on does strange, dark, and mysterious, but not in a scary way at all. He's a great storyteller. Very cool. That's awesome. That's really cool. Yeah. I'll have to check him out a little bit more. Mr. Ballin, that I had a task and purpose in my feed for a while. I know that those are guys. A lot of those guys are more apolitical than they come off as. Yeah. I'm very baby brained, right? I know a lot of those guys. Like I'm sure Mr. Ballin, I'm sure Sean Ryan. You could have a fairly apolitical conversation with some of those guys at sometimes about some things. You could see it on both ways without deciding to act one way or another. But to me, it's just a little too far outside left field. It's not always clear how that stuff either comes up to whatever you call it. Like, I love John Kiriakou. I don't know if I would trust John or Sean Ryan to greet a foreign emissary if the United States needed to get something done. I don't know if I'd trust them with that. I don't know that I would. Oh, cool. Yeah. ChatGPT is a good, great, fine resource. It's a good resource and all that other BS. Yeah. I like, trust is hard in general today. Yeah. Hard to find good broadcasters. That's why I'm kind of cool. Like, I'm kind of happy that, Don Lemon is on CNN now or off CNN. Don Lemon's just on YouTube so anyone can see him. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, David Pacman. What up, Vic? Good to see you. I do like David Pacman. He's a good guy. He's a good guy. I was hoping David Pacman was supposed to, Travis Pangburn's one of the creators I follow. He's produced events with like Dinesh D'Souza, Matt Dillahunty, Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, a bunch of those guys. David Pacman was supposed to do an event with Destiny. He ended up not being able to attend, which was kind of disappointing. I think a lot of people were looking forward to see, especially at the height of Trump madness, when we're seeing MAGA policies that were campaign promises finally coming into political reality. And we're maybe just now getting to conversations that never happened, that could happen or should happen or will still happen one way or another. I think people wanted a voice like David Pakman's to be out front, right? People like David Pakman. People like Sam Cedar, just like people on the other side like Andrew Wilson. They like Tim Pool. They like what's his name? Whatever his name is. I forgot his name. There's a couple guys that will talk about MAGA. They'll talk about red pill, black pill stuff. They'll talk about all that stuff. And yeah. Sam Harris is an immigrant. I didn't know that. Oh yeah, we're gonna see. That's all Trump's policies coming up soon. I think the first stop on Trump's presidential tour, the next big stop is actually pushing for another ceasefire. I think Trump's going to see that the U.S. economy, the amount of stress that we can handle in the U.S. is only so high. It's always been this way. It has always been this way, and it will always be this way, that when Americans or any free people are living in a free market society, when you have to make decisions every day about how you work, how you go out and spend your money, who you might encounter while you go do that, just your general trust in society, based on what society is at that point in time, you can only handle so much stress. Our society can only handle so much stress. The human psyche can only handle so much stress. And like, there's always a reason to be joyful, right? Joyful and triumphant, you know? There's always a reason to be optimistic despite those circumstances. But at the end of the day, people have to respond to risk and stuff like that. And so, let's see. Hey, what's up, William? Good to see you. Yeah, conservatives don't have a better recruiting tool than weak men like Pakman. Yeah, sure. You know, that's cool. You know, I don't know what to say to that. But yeah, you know, that's one of the reasons I think MAGA and Donald Trump, the next step has to be some international calm. If there's not domestic tranquility, and PBS actually published on this the other day, and Alicia's one of our mods here, so everyone say hi. If Alicia tells you to do something, please listen as well, and say thanks or whatever. I don't know, emote to her or something. But yeah, I don't think we agree on everything politically, but so the most recent statistics that PBS released shows that in the United States, there are, so roughly, I think, when it comes to immigrants getting deported with any crime, 60% of Americans do agree that people with any crime should get deported, but 40% do not. 40% do not. And as you start talking about the divide in America that is in the real world, so as you are going out and trying to find the reasons or the evidence, as you are going forth and trying to understand and contextualize why someone far on the left like AOC says something versus someone far on the right like Rand Paul or someone in Donald Trump's cabinet says something, you know, as you go further down and just ask what the status of a person in the United States is, it turns out America is still very deeply divided. Deeply divided. I for one, am even skeptical that someone who maybe would be excited and want to see policy enacted today would at the same time not necessarily know what to do once you get there. What happens once you have Tom Homan running at full force? What happens once you have Alligator Alcatraz running in every single state? What happens when ICE is an amusement park? when you don't have due process, when you get more and more stories floating to the top of people being wrongfully evicted, or you just have Americans who are infatuated, in love with this idea of talking about morbid stories about people that came to the United States to work, and either that worked out or it didn't, whatever. JSST, oh, come on, bro. You got to let me get away with one. You know I'm going to throw my libertarian friends and fam out to that side. Yeah. So, cool. Like, what's it called? Yeah, and so I trust PBS. I would say I think I'm confident saying that both Ron Paul and Rand Paul are both further right, because they're for a very small form of government that doesn't make it into common conversations all the time. And additionally, I think it's also the case that when we think of issues where Americans are deeply divided, either in terms of their exuberance to see a policy, either in the case that they would be, head over heels ready to go vote for a politician that's doing immigration reform or something. Those are all cases, in my opinion, where, dude, no, it's not. JSJT, no, it's not. PBS is not state propaganda. Those are all cases where I do think that it's easy to see that MAGA is far right, because they don't talk to those people in the way that we normally understand. It's like, look, you need to take okay, if I'm very charitable, you need to take an elevator up to the 4th or 5th floor. And then in the moment, I still have to talk about and understand the kind of BS that you're talking about. Southern Trendkill, I'm an old school 90s liberal, basically a Republican today. Yeah, old school 90s liberal, when we still had optimism. We still had optimism in Marco Rubio and Hillary Clinton. Good old classic diplomacy. Hard side, soft side, what are we doing? We're doing one thing. Yeah. I don't think Trump's big. I thought I saw that Trump's the House vote failed for Trump's bill. I don't know. I should have covered that stuff. That's me being brainwashed by academia. If I don't know something that's in the news, or if I misquote something, which I do all the time, that's me being really far off, all that stuff. Yeah. Very weird though that we're going to be talking like geopolitics, like probably pretty heavily in the next week. Pretty heavily in the next week or so. Yeah. How are you feeling about the economy right now? If I just mention so let me mention random facts. So Israel interfered with the Gazan election in 2006, and that's still maybe driving confusion or tensions about Hamas's legitimacy. Israel Hania has been one of the leaders in Hamas since the second Intifada. What about the October 7th war has been more violent than many imagine, with an estimated at least 60,000 Palestinian deaths and under but not too far under 2,000 Israeli deaths, which may adapt. And so for context, it may even rival something like the Chechenian War, the Georgian War in Russia, the War for Georgia. In the War for Georgia, like 1,000 people died total or something. A lot of people just left. So you did have numbers in the hundreds of thousands of refugees, but the scope of actual death and violence of the October 7th war has been muted and understated. For context, if we imagine the US lost between 6,000 and 7,000 US troops during the Israeli and Afghanistan war, which displaced millions and killed hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in only 2 years versus 2 decades, and versus being the United States and 2 countries, 2 formal nation states, the October 7th war has thus far, we've seen about 62,000 total deaths, millions displaced. And so a lot of Hamas's leaders who came from refugee camps in Palestine or in Syria, we are seeing that cycle. Why wouldn't it be recreating itself? Why wouldn't it be recreating itself? Israel is doing the same sort of civil occupations, military occupations that it has been doing since the early to mid 2000s. Hamas used a group of 30 to 40,000 armed militants, the Al-Qassam brigades, the strongest militant group in Palestine, that has been responsible for, at this point, well over 1,000 Israeli deaths. So that same group was used by a political party who was elected. And so we're looking for a ceasefire, and we're not looking for an end to the war, a truce. How are you guys doing? How are you doing in America? How have y'all been doing the last 2 years? How are we doing tomorrow, though? That's what I want to know. A little Nietzschean. Toshi, what up? Good to see you again. Infidel Lone Wolf, what's up? Yeah, so I'm not trying to stress people out. Hopefully, all that stuff. I'm not trying to do any of that kind of stuff. But Benjamin Netanyahu, I think he's traveling to the United States next week. Next week we'll see Ben Netanyahu. We'll see him again. And what else? I only care about Cambodia. Where's Cambodia? Southeast Asia. That's Cambodia. Assalamu alaikum from Russia. Good to see you. How are you? Russia's been crazy, right? The Chechnya war in Russia, if I recall, was very incredibly violent. The Georgian war, less violent, but still fairly violent. You get different numbers from everybody. It's crazy to think, all part of a big campaign. I know people will say that, like, look, I don't know. Israel and Hamas just have to accept that they are. I would find it hard to believe that speech from Benjamin Netanyahu and speech from Hamas that is talking about a document or talking about unifying a strategy that gets both parties out of the war psychologically as well as in practice, right? You have the praxis to move out of the war. That's what you're going for. You have a document that describes what that actually is. right? And so praxis is this view that reality and knowledge is constructed by action. Normally in like most theory, we'll talk about materialism. Some theory will talk about culture. If you are looking to get something punched through and up, you might talk about praxis. You might talk about the actions state level actors take consistently and coherently, from the prime minister down through sort of key ministers of defense on the Israeli side to end the war, right? Israel doesn't want to keep printing brochures saying that they've sent 10,000 trucks of aid. 10,000 trucks of aid. Can you imagine that? Have you ever seen like a commercial loading dock for semi-trucks? Everyone has seen that. You drive by, you see all the trucks backed into the bay. Israel has sent 2 million tons of food to Gaza. Why has Israel done that? Well, because Israel and Hamas have been fighting for the last 2 years in what is an underscored, incredibly violent war. It's an incredibly violent war. So the praxis right now is to talk around any semblance of diplomacy. The praxis right now, the action creating reality and knowledge that we have right now, is to make light of the fact that the international community, as well as people suffering from the war tangibly, as well as strained relationships, all of the people it would be good to see a ceasefire for, the understated nature of a violence is a disservice to those people's wills and wishes, in addition to it being a disservice to, we'd think, the states themselves. We would think that if you can see a way to alleviate this stress and pressure, that would seemingly be a better way to manage diplomatically this problem. What percentage of the United States do I think is religious? I don't know, dude. I would guess 60%. I would guess 60 or 70%. That would just be like a intuitive guess. 60 or 70% is probably religious. Maybe less. Yeah. That's crazy, People can start throwing around accusations. Donald Trump's going to want to do this if Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't play ball. Donald Trump's already signaled that he's willing to pull aid from Ukraine. Maybe he's willing to do the same in Israel. And so when you have a cohesive story, whether or not that's in the United States interest versus whether or not it's reality, like, is that the real world, bro? It seems like it is. You have this competing narrative that Benjamin Netanyahu, at this point, him and whoever is leading the efforts in Israel, alongside leaders in Hamas who will not admit that they have a military of 40,000 people in Al-Qassam that are actively recruiting and finding a way to continue a fight that they started by causing roughly 10-15% of all Israeli deaths from conflict since the start of the country in a single day, while taking civilians hostage, the hostages. And so where's the praxis? Where's the actual ability to connect a simple piece of paper, one that Donald Trump alleges his administration will be able to put forth? They'll be able to facilitate it. We're putting our actions into this document because we are so done with this that we could say this document describes reality. Don't you have to, at some point, account for why that isn't the next solution? Why is Donald Trump even coming out of the White House without a plan? Why is Donald Trump coming out of the White House without a way to make both Israel, as well as people in Palestine, whoever is trying to keep the strings together in Hamas, keep them confident enough to keep the peace. That doesn't make any sense. Iran stocks of oil are #1 stocks of oil, Toshi. I will tell you this. Let me say something. I will say something about the sharpness of reality. I will also say something about, if I've Slavoj Zizek, the nature of Iranian history and diplomacy. I don't know. Yeah. Slavoj Zizek is really interesting because what he might say about this is no, you can't talk about praxis, you can't talk about action, you can't talk about international law. Why in the first place are psychologies? Why? Like, this is the Hegelian sort of view when you're talking about historical narratives and stuff. Slavoj Zizek might say something like you can't talk about praxis, you can't talk about leadership structures, you have to talk about the psychology of Israeli securitization. You have to talk about how this has played off Zionism. If you make Zionism primary, what happens then? What changes if we talk about Israel having to have a negotiation with extremist settlers, because Zionism might account for that. Zionism might account for opposition to Bibi Netanyahu's party as well. And so you have a psychology that hasn't been willing in the last 24 months to commit action into a document known as peace. You've had a psychology which is willing to tell you and describe to you what it's like to have land, air, and sea assaulting as well as providing food to the Palestinian people, killing as well as feeding. And so what does this come from? Where did this come from? This can't be as simple. Maybe it is as simple as being about elections. Maybe it is the fact that you had Hamas get elected and then fight an internal civil war to force another Islamist group out of power. Israel tried to stop that to happen by acting anti-democratically. And so you see anti-democratic action of a certain kind as necessary, then driving towards this anti-democratic government. And so when you see anti-democratic and offensive actions, you must then adapt your own anti-democratic psychology as well as policy, the type of government and the type of decisions, the type of way people understand praxis, the type of way people that want to see pragmatic common sense solutions coming forth that shouldn't even be asking about Iran. That's the ironic part, right? This is why Slavoj Zizek and Hegelianism is great. Like, these types of arguments and ways of thinking, even though I am very much a geopolitical realist. Thank you. I appreciate you. I think this is next level, dog. This is next level, dog. This is years and years of not shaving, baby. Go ahead, smash that like, hit subscribe. Let's go, baby. Let's pick up the energy. If we ain't here to work, what are we doing? And so, I'm sorry, Vic. I'm sorry, Vic. Next level lazy. You want to see the lazy? All right, let's go. That's lazy. And so this is Slavoj Zizek in a nutshell. This is the interest of Hegelian dialectic, is why is it that Donald Trump has engaged in this Iranian affair without conducting independent diplomacy? Why is it that he has lost such a grip on his own cabinet that while we are seeing the extreme cost of anti-democratic action by Israel, irregardless if it came from Hamas, you can be the hugest Israel apologist in the world. And yet the one thing that I still see is that while this is happening and we're seeing how much it costs to evolve, we're seeing that this doesn't resolve conflicts. We're seeing people don't believe it. While all this is happening, Donald Trump is still supporting a counter-democratic narrative about the Los Angeles anti-fascist protests happening in LA that happened all around the country. He is still pushing his own anti-democratic agenda. And so Zizek isn't a liberal in any sense of the word, but there's something about the Western psychology, right? I'll go back into my deep, red-blooded American shit in a minute, just for Vic. My bad. But yeah, you cannot undermine that this psychological cultural drive that prevents good policy. At the very least, it stops a document from getting in front of people where they can believe a common sense solution. If you get yourself to a place where you have so many reasons for stuff, so much evidence for everything, that there's no common sense then. Common sense is out the window. You forgot to listen to the Lorax. You forgot to listen for whoever. It's all bad. It's just all bad at that point in time. And so you end up with a nonsensical, illogical narrative at some point in time. And that's it. Maybe you can't depend on Slavoj Zizek to tell you about the deep-rooted history of terror coming out of the Palestinian regime. You can't tell them about a borrowed and rented government that was rented from the West and why people felt that was unjust. Maybe Heigl doesn't cover these cases. Maybe we would look and see that these are all cases where the human psyche was just strong enough to find a course of extreme violence that we've seen with the October 7th war. And if you're in the West, this underscores the main point, that the Israeli war has been the Israeli and Hamas war has been one of the most violent short-term conflicts that we've seen. The amount of ordnances dropped and launched from both sides, missiles and rockets, small arms fire, 2,000 Israeli deaths, 60 to 100, 120,000 Palestinian deaths. And yet they still cannot lift pen to paper. They cannot do one thing that appears to be what will alleviate stress for people. And that's not praxis. How is that not praxis? How is it ever creating a reality when you are literally rewriting the story again and again and again? If you want to talk about madness and a weird parallel between the past and now, in 2006, this was after the Second Intifada, led by Yasser Arafat. This was, I think, before or after, but whatever. The way in which today Israel provides food trucks to refugees, what are now all displaced people from war who can't fend for themselves because they live in a conflict zone in Palestine. Israel used to support the PLA in that way. There's all these really funny little examples about the PLA babysitting Hamas after Hamas was elected. And the extremist settlers, who knows, let's ditch this Zizikian bullshit that these settlers are going to be part of solving the grand philosophical crisis of Zionism. Let's ditch that bullshit real quick. But just for the sake of discussion or argument, if you have a debate in Israel about whether or not Hamas was elected or not elected, how closely they affiliate with Al-Qassam, how you describe Al-Qassam, all of this stuff, this all, to me, looks and feels and seems like it is almost under the narrative that people are telling, which is that, well, we decided to fight in the first place. We always decided we're just going to fight. You said intifada, funnily. Intifada. I think I have tater tots in my fridge. right now. So intifada. I apologize. It's my bad. It's my bad. I would never imagine so many war-torn, tired, exhausted, brutal, fucking observed people would tolerate another week of waiting for the leaders in Hamas, the leaders in Al-Qassam, the leaders in Israel, the leaders in the United States to settle this war that we didn't understand in the first place. I had something, I lost it. So this is one of those funny things, is that Israel and Palestine have always been really bad at contextualizing what it means when an Israeli soldier or an Israeli citizen gets killed. They've also been perhaps bad at this because Palestine is equally bad at interpreting that. Right? When you have, whether it's propaganda or organization, like actual material organizational structures in Hamas and the militant groups that they lead, that are whatever, that are, you see these victories as another part of some greater mission. Like, just say that, okay? It doesn't have to be theological and I forgot what I was saying. It's crazy though. This shit's crazy. It's gnar, dude. The whole West is Antifa. Waving flags in the US, Palestine and Israel are so great. Yeah, they're really bad at contextualizing stuff. How do you not talk about psychology? Well, it's pretty easy. You talk about the material conditions. Like, this is part of the objectivity of like Western realism, is like, yeah, there's always some game theoretic calculation about like, hey, if you don't hit one of mine, I'm not going to hit one of yours. But there's also the dead stop of putting an actual dollar value on a human life. That's hard to do when, again, you have, all of whatever it is, East Jerusalem gets fucking, wherever it is. You always have some next hill to climb in occupation in Gaza and Palestine. It's hard when people can't contextualize what violence is or just avoid it in the first place. And it's hard when it's so close to your formal political structures. But then you don't need Slavoj Žižek anymore, right? You're closer to having something on a document. No means no. If there's no, what does no mean? Why are we talking? Why don't you guys just go out and, like you've been doing, wage one of the most violent urban random bomb dropping wars that we've seen in so long? It's absolutely vicious. Absolutely vicious. Absolutely vicious. It's horrible. It's horrendous. Horrendous. Vic says, I wish people didn't hide behind religion to kill each other. Yeah. I mean, at least just say what your religion is first. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense at all. In Israel, you have fundamental as well as very Western liberal democratic Jews, and you have people of different faiths that are not Jewish at all. So why is that about Israel? And then in Palestine, in Gaza, you have socialist, anti-socialist, authoritarian socialists, jihadists working with socialists and Democrats and liberals. So how is that about Palestine? Doesn't make sense. Yeah. It's crazy stuff. It's crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. Boom. Yeah. All right. Yerp. Yeah. Let's do a random Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Since I have the book, I have the power. I will tell you this to each of you individually in chat. Thanks for hanging out. And if you ever thought you were important here, as soon as I pick up this book, as soon as any of us picks up this book, and you can see, tell me when to stop. Stop. Okay. Whoops. That's the first page of the book. We're going to do that again. Stop. Okay. Okay. Sovereignty. Hey, this is great. I think Vic and Alicia were just talking about sovereignty in some sense. In the Bible, don't you have to use religion as well as your ability to control a people for war? Isn't that sovereignty? Jean-Jacques Rousseau agrees. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, we're good. My argument then, this is from book 2, chapter 1, the sovereignty is inalienable. Jean-Jacques Rousseau says that my argument then is that sovereignty being nothing other than the exercise of the general will, nothing other than the exercise of the general will can never be alienated. And that the sovereign, which is simply a collective power being, cannot be represented by anyone but itself. Power may be delegated, but the will cannot be. So let's read that one more time together. My argument then is that sovereignty being nothing other than the exercise of the general will can never be alienated. So if we have this shared sense of social order, desire, what actually happens, on the road to Carthage, what are the shared things between us? The general will is this metaphysical concept. So my argument then is that sovereignty being nothing other than the exercise of the general will can never be alienated. And that the sovereign, which is simply a collective being, cannot be represented by anyone but itself. Cannot be represented by anyone but itself. Power may be delegated, but the will cannot be. Very crazy. All of the towers of Babylon fell in the Bible. In political theory, when you get to someone Andrew Wilson called European, John Locke, which I found funny, John Locke is a Brit. British people are not European. They're British. But one of the things that we get from John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau when we're talking about a single undivided state, for Locke, legitimacy is just about the rights and a minimal government, right? You have a minimal government. I'm not going to be looking at anything other than property rights. I'm not going to be looking at anything other than my natural religion, my belief in this natural law. I don't need to go back to the caveman days and I've got bones that I'm playing bongo drums with. I've got bones in my nose. I'm getting tattoos for dead leopards and stuff like this. Bunch of, John Locke would say a bunch of bullshit. John Locke tells us in the state of nature and society, we generally know how to resolve disputes with each other. Sometimes it gets ugly and nasty, but this is the basis of a society. It's the fact that we have this common nature of property creating, and the fact that we resolve disputes together, that all we're going to look at is that our rights are protected and that the government isn't overstepping such that it takes away our rights in the first place. Rousseau says this is very different. For Rousseau, there isn't some object that you learn about in natural religion. You don't step into your life and come to some grand realization. For Rousseau, he's saying that the exercise of the general will can never be alienated. You don't have a society if the general will is alienated. If you have a shared endeavor. And that's what you actually get to in a society. Yeah, property rights, cool. Procedurally cool. It makes sense. But so is equal access of education. Locke's my favorite Locke line is that when we talk about positive liberty, the government places us somewhere between the bogs and precipices such that the government never furthers an authentic interest. I think that's the general sort of gist of it. That, such that the end of the government, by taking away a right, never furthers someone's interest or their rights in the first place. So that any government action which is illegitimate does little more than hedge us against the bogs and precipices. So you're still doing the same thing even when you're doing more, sort of what John Locke says. A British guy, not a European. And then for Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the sovereign, which is simply a collective being, so our government cannot be represented by anyone but itself. Power may be delegated, but the will itself cannot be. The will itself cannot be. And so you can see this is different. Locke now says that, well, we're gonna tamp it in, everybody. We're gonna tamp it in and we're gonna go north. We're gonna go north, and guess what's north? It's the same thing that was south. You can't do more by doing more. When you go north, you get more north, and it's the same north. And for Jean-Jacques Rousseau, if we remember from yesterday, one of the things Rousseau defines is that in the first place, we're talking about freedom. In the first place, we're talking about not having to fight. We see an opportunity and we don't have to fight. This is better. This is the state of nature, and this is us leaving it. Welcome. We took a left at the last exit. And so we can see that he's incredibly consistent. He's a brilliant person. Rousseau's one of these people that just sat with this idea. This entire book, The Social Contract, as much as I can say about Jean-Jacques Rousseau, whether you agree or you disagree, maybe you like Lockean theory, he sat with this idea, and it's difficult to imagine that he didn't talk to a lot of people. It's difficult to imagine that he didn't have both spiritual as well as deep philosophical guidance when he was putting this together. It's difficult to see why, his later work, like Emile and stuff like that, even, why did you even need to do that? You didn't need to write anything else. You wrote this book. Good job. You're done. So my argument then is that sovereignty, being nothing other than the exercise of the general will, can never be alienated, and that the sovereign, which is simply a collective being, cannot be repressed by anyone but itself. Power may be delegated, but the will cannot be. The will cannot be repressed. Say what you will and must about freedom, opportunity, and subjugation. When we create a government to solve freedom, subjugation, opportunity, power, when we give our power over to this process of society in the first place, by retaining it, by keeping ourselves better, because we had to. We have to, and so we had to. And it's inalienable. You have sovereignty or you have nothing. If there's no general will, what exists then? I know what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to go eat some tater tots. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out. Yeah, it was fun. I like talking to y'all. The Reef, good to see you. Weird ass hippie, get a haircut. Thank you. Thank you. Alicia, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking a wrench. If you don't want it, I will take that wrench away. Let me know. I love seeing it on there. Forget Paul Rudd. You must be related to Thomas Middleditch. I don't know who that is. What is freedom? We're the land of the free with 5% of the world, LOL, and 25% of prisoners. And a lot of the wealth. Thanks. Have a good night. Take care. Yeah. Freedom is just what it is. It's the freedom to do the thing you said you were going to do, and then the freedom otherwise. Breathe. From where? From how? How would I do that? All right. Thanks for joining, everyone. I'll see y'all another night. Slap like and yeah, all that stuff. Have a good night. See ya.